Tonight we begin with a development that Western intelligence agencies had feared, Russian military officials had dismissed, and Kremlin insiders had quietly prepared for. A mutiny that unfolded not over weeks or months, but in mere hours. Hours that shattered Putin's image of absolute control. Hours that exposed the fractures within Russia's military command. Hours that may have changed the course of this war forever. What Yevgeny Prigozhin and his Wagner forces did today crossed a line that Vladimir Putin had believed would never break, and when that line shattered, the Kremlin did not respond with strength. They responded with panic, confusion, and ultimately retreat. For weeks now, there had been signals, not from official Kremlin sources, not from state media, and just whispers, that Prigozhin was preparing something unprecedented. Wagner has been brutal, yes, but they have been predictable in their brutality. Their moves have followed a certain logic, a pattern, almost a choreography with Moscow. But what set off alarm bells in Washington and London this week was that the pattern went silent. Intelligence analysts who monitor Russian military communications know the indicators. The encrypted channels going dark, the unusual troop movements away from Ukraine, the stockpiling of ammunition in rear positions, the sudden disappearance of Wagner commanders from known locations, all of that went quiet. And whenever Prigozhin goes quiet, it means something is about to get very loud. Early this morning, satellite imagery detected what analysts described as a massive column of military vehicles, so including heavy armor and anti-aircraft systems that had not been moved from Ukrainian positions in over 6 months. These are the kinds of assets that Wagner only deploys when they are signaling something very specific, an offensive operation, a defensive consolidation, or a direct challenge to authority. Western observers didn't know which category this fell into, or whether it fell into all three at once, but what they did know was that Prigozhin was changing posture. And when a private military commander with 25,000 battle-hardened troops shifts posture without explanation, even by small measure, every intelligence agency on Earth pays attention. The response from the Kremlin tonight was not normal, it was not routine, it was not controlled, it was chaos. See, source after source inside Moscow described Putin's reaction as stunned, furious, and perhaps most importantly, paralyzed by indecision, but intimidation only works if the target hesitates. Prigozhin did not. In fact, his advance today was among the most brazen military moves we've seen in modern Russian history. Here's what we know. Within hours of declaring his march on Moscow, Prigozhin's forces had captured Rostov-on-Don. These weren't token units. These were Wagner's elite fighters, the same soldiers who had taken Bakhmut, the same men Putin had relied upon to do what his regular army could not. Tonight, multiple sources confirmed that Wagner columns advanced to within 200 kilometers of Moscow, including positions along the M4 highway that had been reinforced for what analysts believe was a direct push toward the capital. And Prigozhin moved before the Kremlin could organize a coherent defense. They took Rostov's military headquarters. They neutralized Southern Military District Command. They bypassed regular army units that were either unwilling or unable to engage. In other words, Prigozhin targeted the nerve center of Russia's entire Ukraine operation, the command structure that would have coordinated any resistance. This is what made the situation so unprecedented. Putin's regime wasn't just facing a rebellion, it was facing a military force that knew exactly where to strike. And the Kremlin, understanding that fully, responded not with force, not with counterattack, but with negotiation. They didn't mobilize the army effectively. They didn't call Putin's nuclear bluff. They called Belarus. They called Lukashenko. And here's where the story becomes even more destabilizing. Western analysts now believe that Prigozhin's march was designed to test the loyalty of Russia's military establishment after months of tension with Defense Minister Shoigu. Prigozhin wanted to see whether Russian soldiers would fire on Wagner, but instead the opposite happened. Regular army units didn't engage Wagner. They stepped aside with a compliance that was so immediate, so complete, that even Western intelligence noticed. You don't get that kind of passive response easily, but today, Prigozhin did. Military analysts speaking with Western media under anonymity described Putin's position as fundamentally weakened, a leader who now owes his survival to a Belarusian dictator's phone call. But Prigozhin proved today that he remains both capable and willing. His forces were not only disciplined, they were coordinated so precisely that they covered 800 kilometers in a single day. That speed matters because it shows Russian command had no effective early warning. It shows that Putin is not the all-knowing strongman. He is a leader who was caught completely off guard. As reports continued coming in throughout the day, we learned more about the scale of Prigozhin's operation. Wagner forces occupied Rostov's military headquarters, forcing Southern Command to evacuate. Armored columns bypassed Voronezh, a city that had been reinforced in the last 48 hours. Wagner units operating along the M4 reportedly disabled communication relays used by the Kremlin to coordinate regional military responses. This wasn't just a protest march. This wasn't just a power play. This was a military operation. This was an attempted coup, and an attempted coup is the one thing Vladimir Putin has spent 23 years preventing. For every measure of control he has built, Prigozhin countered with something that exposed its fragility. Remember, Putin thought his security services were impenetrable. He thought his military commanders were absolutely loyal. He thought no one inside Russia would dare challenge him openly. But tonight, the exact opposite happened. His security services failed to detect the operation. His military commanders refused to fight. His most effective fighting force turned their guns toward Moscow. What makes this moment so dangerous and so unpredictable is that Putin's near overthrow happened at a time when he is under maximum pressure. Hardliners want escalation in Ukraine. Its oligarchs want economic stability. Military families want their sons home. The international community wants accountability. Putin is balancing these demands while fighting a war that has already cost Russia over 200,000 casualties. And when leaders in that position face internal rebellions, they don't respond from strength. They respond from desperation. They respond from fear. The Kremlin's eventual statement, now broadcast across state media, was designed to signal that Putin remains in control and will not allow armed rebellion. Officials said plainly that Prigozhin's actions were a stab in the back, inconsistent with patriotic duty. That is Kremlin language for, we were completely unprepared and nearly lost everything. You don't usually hear that level of public anger from Putin unless something genuinely threatened his power. Meanwhile, Prigozhin addressed his forces in a defiant, unapologetic video tonight. He said, "We did not want to overthrow the government. We wanted justice." He said, "The military leadership is destroying the Russian army." And he said, "We will not forget what happened here." These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from a man who now knows exactly how vulnerable Putin really is. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. Prigozhin's march wasn't isolated. So along with his advance on Moscow, Wagner-affiliated social media channels coordinated messaging across Russia. Regional governors hesitated to condemn the mutiny publicly. Military bloggers, usually pro-Kremlin, expressed sympathy for Prigozhin's grievances. All of this happened within the same 24-hour period. When multiple power centers waver at once, it means something fundamental has shifted. Analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that Putin will purge his military leadership to prevent future challenges. Another is that Putin will attempt to quietly eliminate Prigozhin despite the deal. A third possibility, the one worrying officials the most, is that this is only the beginning of internal Russian fractures. But today, Putin learned a lesson. He didn't project strength. He didn't crush the rebellion. He didn't demonstrate control. He negotiated from weakness. What we're watching now is a test of regime survival. Prigozhin wants to see if Putin will keep his word. Putin wants to show he remains in command. NATO wants to understand if Russia's command structure is compromised. And Ukraine wants to exploit whatever fractures emerge. Tonight, we've heard from intelligence officials who are now monitoring Russian military communications around the clock. They say confusion remains widespread among regional commanders. They say loyalty to Moscow is being questioned openly in private channels. And they say Putin's decision to negotiate rather than fight is likely being interpreted as weakness by every faction inside Russia. But Prigozhin is not backing down quietly. In fact, Prigozhin is relocating to Belarus, a position that keeps him dangerously close to the action. His withdrawal today, calculated, organized, and defiant, sent a message to Putin that this isn't over. And it sent a message to the world that Russia's strongman image has cracked. As the hours go on, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly Putin promised to end this crisis. But what we do know is that today changed everything. It exposed Putin's vulnerability. It revealed the military's divided loyalties, and it demonstrated that even the Kremlin is not immune to rebellion. What happens next will depend on what Putin does in the coming days. If he honors the deal, this moment will be remembered as the day his power began to fade. If he eliminates Prigozhin, he risks creating a martyr. Either way, the damage is done. And tonight, for the first time in 23 years, Vladimir Putin appears to be afraid. The Kremlin is quiet, too quiet. And when Putin is quiet, it means he is calculating. It means he is choosing his next move carefully, because tonight, Putin learned something he has never truly faced. He is not untouchable, he is not invincible, and his grip on Russia is weaker than anyone believed. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. The myth of Putin's absolute power has been shattered. The cracks in Russia's regime are now visible to the world, and we will be here, watching every detail as the next phase unfolds.